Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to apologize for this going on a bit of a hiatus. So, I don't really have a good excuse. Essentially what happened was normally what I do is I have two SD cards. I will stick one in my camera, one in my computer, and I will just alternate which episodes I record on a given day, and just alternate on my SD cards while my other ones are rendering. That's normally how I do my reviews and Let's Plays. It's just I just alternate days. But unfortunately, I lost one of my SD cards. Couldn't do that anymore, so I spent the past several weeks trying to find it, and eventually it just turned up. I didn't find it as it just appeared one day while I was looking for it, and I don't even know where it was. I don't even know where it was hidden. I don't know where it disappeared to. All I know is that one day I got up when I was just kind of gave up on the fact that I was never going to find it. It just suddenly turned up out of the blue. So yeah, don't have a real valid excuse. I'm just apologizing for the fact that my SD card just went missing and decided to suddenly appear again. So yeah, essentially, but yeah, in case, getting into actual Trollhunters, like just for a life update. But yeah, this episode is interesting in that we finally find out the identity of the Changeling that Strickler has had commissioned from Nomura, and who they had swapped out, and that's the main focus of the episode. But also we find out a little bit more about why Ark is a pacifist. And the episode does elaborate on that a little bit. So the episode opens up with a POV shot of what we eventually find out is Frogwa, who proceeds to climb up the Nunez house and climbs directly into Enrique's bedroom. And we've met Enrique. He's Claire's little baby brother. But yeah, the goblin shows up and appears in his bedroom and starts cooing at him to just kind of get him to not really, put up any much resistance against the goblin. Not that he can. He's a baby. But in any case, later that morning, the next morning, it's at this point where as we find out, Jim is currently eyeing a new Vespa. That's as we find out. And we find out he wants for his birthday, but can't get for obvious reasons. He and Toby do talk about the specs for a little bit before Jim ultimately starts fantasizing about being able to ride around on it with Claire holding onto him. And Toby just imagines him riding shotgun in the passenger seat with Jim and Claire. So but then realizes that he was butting in on Jim's fantasy, so he decides to stop that. But of course, at this point where Toby points out that Jim should either get it or ask for it for his birthday. And Jim points out that he's probably not going to get it for his birthday because it's very expensive, and his mom probably isn't going to be able to afford it. But not that he will be able to afford it, because currently it is over $300, and by the time he has a steady job, is able to pay for it, he openly admits that they'll practically be driving themselves. So for that reason, he decides to put off on it. But and that's not far off. I think this came out in like 2013. I'm pretty sure this came out in like 2013, 2014, before self-driving cars were, well, not necessarily not before they were a thing, but before they became a mainstay thing. Before they existed previously, but they've only recently come into their own. The technology has only recently progressed, and a large part of that is because Elon Musk, the creator of Tesla, has started making self-driving cars in an effort to because billionaires, some of them do stupid things with their money. Elon Musk is one of those. I don't really respect him as a person, but I can't appreciate that he's trying to help create self-driving cars. I can't appreciate that he's trying to help push the market on that, even if I don't, particularly like him as a person. But as they're discussing that, Jim catches something out of the corner of his eye, and then proceeds to see a goblin running around on the electrical wiring, holding what as Jim tries to get a closer look, quickly discovers is a baby. At which point, Jim quickly realizes that the goblin has abducted someone, and immediately goes in to go after it. With Toby kind of missing the whole thing, and for the rest of the episode, somewhat gaslights Jim into thinking that he probably didn't see what he saw because Toby didn't see it. He and I'll openly admit that he's in denial about the fact that he saw something, or at the very least missed something. So he proceeds to follow Jim, thinking that Jim has officially gone off his nut and he's gone stressed from troll hunter duties. But of course, Jim does proceed to follow the goblin, and eventually goes into a dark alley where he quickly realizes that the goblin has since eluded him. But he does find a little stuffed bunny that's just left on the ground, and he quickly realizes that the baby that is the only clue to actually finding out who the baby was, because obviously the baby dropped it. And proceeds to stuff it in his knapsack, but quickly while Toby is still in denial about whether or not Jim actually saw something, Jim does insist that he knows what he saw, but also proceeds to point out that he's curious as to why a goblin would just randomly abduct a baby out of the blue. But as he's thinking through the implications of that, he eventually realizes that the goblin might be trying to steal a baby to create another changeling, and quickly realizes that they're going to have to tell someone about that. Sure enough, very next training session with Blinky and Arg, where Jim of course is actually climbing on the rock wall outside of the hero's forge, and is just kind of hanging from a safety rope that Arg is holding, because Arg's big and strong. He can easily support Jim's weight. But of course, Jim then proceeds to tell Blinky about what he saw, and Blinky points out that it is very possible that the goblin is taking the changeling back, the new changeling back to Darklands, where it can be swapped out with somebody. And of course, when Jim points out that if that's even possible, pointing out that the Darklands are supposed to be sealed off, and there shouldn't be any way to get in and out. Even pointing out that Gunmar is trying to escape from the Darklands, and points out that that seems like kind of counterintuitive. Blinky then proceeds to reassure him that Gunmar is trying to open up the main gateway to get in and out of the Darklands, but he also proceeds to point out that the Darklands aren't completely closed off. He goes on to explain that the Darklands have several small little holes in and out that kind of occasionally, they're like small little cracks that pop in and out, and small which aren't particularly big, not big enough for a troll or even a person to go through. But small things can go through quite easily. And with Arg adding things like a cat, like a goblin or a baby, small creatures that could easily fit through a hole, and also by extension cats and other small things. So, not a particular. So yeah, nothing Garmar can squeeze through, but something he can send an agent through if he had to. So those kinds of things. But of course, it's at this point where Jim then wonders if it's safe, and if the babies can actually be safe, can be left there. And Blinky reassures him that, ironically enough, the Darklands are actually the safest place for Enrique to be, because as he points out, in order for the changeling to be able to shapeshift between human and troll form, the changeling needs its baby lookalike to be basically unharmed. So they're essentially kept in a nursery and are unable to be well. It's essentially just kept safe in a loving care and all those other things. And of course, Blinky points out that it'll probably be fine. But and of course, that does ease Jim's worries as he's training, pointing out that obviously it's good that he'll be safe at the very least, but does point out that sooner or later they'll have to get him out of there. But to this point where Jim, as he's training on the rock wall, I should mention, he then proceeds to fall, and of course Toby panics and tries to grab him, which causes him to go over as well, and Arg has to pull both of them up. But of course, it's at this point where Jim is retrieved on his safety line, and they decide that that's the end of training for today. But before they do that, it's at this point where Blinky does proceed to point out that obviously, regardless of the circumstances, if the changelings are multiplying and growing their numbers, he obviously points out that means that there's most likely a lot more changelings in Arcadia Oaks than he would like, and doesn't feel comfortable with the fact that neither of them particularly safe if any of their friends and neighbors could be changelings. And for that reason, he decides that since Droll is already guarding Jim's house, he decides that the next logical step for them would be to assign Toby a bodyguard. So he gives Toby Arg. And of course, Toby is happy about how he gets to have Arg as a roomie. And the two do proceed to high five and fist bump when they realize they're going to be roommates. But of course, this is this point where Blinky then proceeds to tell Jim that next time Jim isn't going to, that next time he points out the next time they'll do it with the safety line, and pointing out that the only reason Jim fell was because he knew somebody would catch him, and does point out that they'll need to up his training if he wants to put more risk into actually going out and fighting things. But in case later that day, I believe it's Toby. Toby is surprised that Jim is still carrying around the stuffed animal that he found, with Jim pointing out that he's not going to rest until he finds out where he got it, and more importantly, who belongs to. But of course, Toby once again points out that's probably nothing to worry about, insisting that it's most likely just some random stuffed animal, and that's probably not somebody getting kidnapped by Changeling. And also points out that there's pretty much that's unlikely that Jim's ever going to find the owner. Conveniently, as Claire then proceeds to walk up, and it's revealed that the stuffed animal does in fact belong to Enrique. And of course, Jim is shocked to discover that Enrique is the one who lost the doll, and then lost the stuffed rabbit. But and of course, Claire points out that it's his favorite toy, and points out that he can't really go to sleep without it. And also points out that he's been acting strangely. And she does point out it's probably because he's been restless without his stuffed rabbit. But of course, it's at this point where that immediately perks Jim's interest when he realizes that Enrique has been acting differently, and immediately asks Claire how he's been acting differently. But of course, it's at this point where Toby stops him and then proceeds to point out that maybe it's just some sort of random generic stuffed animal that Claire just kind of had bought at any convenience store, and there's no guarantee that it's probably the same animal. But of course, Claire reassures him, pointing out that she would reckon that she also had the little stuffed rabbit when she was younger, and points out that since they both grew up with it, she would absolutely know if it was theirs. And that's at this point where we actually get the setup for the episode, because it's at this point where Mary Wayne comes over and tells Claire that she can't babysit for her for tonight. It is with of course Claire being very disappointed because obviously Claire reveals that she was going to stick Mary with babysitting duty so she can go and see her favorite band in concert, Papa Skull, which with a bit of a fourth wall break, and the fact that because they use the same models for the characters over and over, and I should mention that they never really changed the models, and that's something me and my sister did joke about when we watched the series for the first time. But this is something my sister specifically has noticed and annoyed her to no end. But the characters pretty much wear the same clothes in every single episode they're in, and their appearance is fundamentally the same regardless. So there's just a joke up here about how she practically lives in her Papa Skull t-shirt, because she quite literally does, because they literally only animated the one set of clothes for her and nothing else. That is it. Everybody just wears the same outfit every day. and it is something where that's something they poke fun at more than once because it's a made for streaming TV series, and obviously they're growing, and obviously their budget isn't great, but it's still fun. It's still a funny little thing that they point out. So. Yeah, but yeah, they do point out that that's essentially the same they essentially just wear the same outfits over and over, and it's funny. But in case at this point where Mary points out that she can't babysit tonight because, as it turns out, she's been asked out by 2 different guys, including a guy that she just refers to as Tight Jeans Hank, and points out that love has no schedule. And of course, Toby and Jim overhear all of this, of course, with Toby asking if he knows with Jim asking Toby if he knows what this means, and Toby just goes to the very obvious assumption that it means that Mary Wang is a player, essentially. She dates multiple guys at once, and isn't really too concerned about any of them finding out. So, that's not a morally acceptable thing, but it is a thing that happens in this series. I mean, polygamy is a thing, don't get me wrong, but I don't think Mary is poly. I don't think, at all. I just think she likes dating multiple guys at once. But it's not even like a poly thing, just as a, keep my options open thing, which isn't great, but, But in any case, Jim then proceeds to correct him, pointing out that it means that they have an opportunity to investigate if Enrique is in fact a changeling. At which point Jim immediately steps up and tells Claire that he'd be more than happy to watch Enrique for her while she's at her Papa Skull concert. With her being very over the moon, being very happy about that, and but also wonders if Jim has actually babysat before. At which point Jim points out that he kind of bluffs his way through it, but he does point out that they call him Jim the baby-handed. So which is a reference to the nickname that Griselda called it, that Dwella called him many episodes ago, but I can't remember her name. But yeah, but Dwella called him Jim the baby-handed. And he does point, and he just kind of used that to kind of make it seem like he's a good babysitter. But it was taken as an insult, but he takes it in stride here and uses it to bluff his way into becoming Enrique's babysitter, so he can investigate whether or not Enrique is a changeling. And of course, Claire is very ecstatic about the fact that she's now found a new babysitter, and tells Jim that she's so happy that she can kiss him. At which point she proceeds to kiss him on the cheek, much to her word, and then proceeds to run off to class, but tells him to come by her house at 7. And he says that he'll be there. So but in case it's at this point where Jim then proceeds to get ready to go over to Claire's house, and while we get a bit of an aside with Arg at Toby's house, Arg then proceeds to come. Arg notably is having difficulty getting into the house, because obviously Arg is a much bigger frame, while Toby's house is very tiny, compared, at least in terms of troll dwellings. And but of course, Toby then the first thing Toby does is check to make sure his Nana isn't home. Calling out to her and telling her that he's home, and then also much more loudly once he's assured that she's not. He then proceeds to claim that he has a giant troll and that he's going to be living there, And of course, when he realizes the coast is clear, he escorts Arg into the house, and points out that he'll love his Nana, pointing out that essentially she points out that they'll love each other, but as long as she never sees him, which he points out that she probably won't, because as I stated in her debut episode, Nancy Domzowski is legally blind. And Toby does kind of reveal / reiterate that for the audience, because it was heavily implied in her debut episode and outright told to us here that she's legally blind and will probably not notice that there's a giant ass troll living in her house. But In any case, it's at this point where they then proceed to escort Arg up to his bedroom, where he then proceeds to tell him that they'll have so much fun, they'll play games, do a couple of other things, and also show him a bunch of other cool stuff that he's got. At which point, when Arg eventually gets upstairs, because again, the house is not built with Arg in mind. It's built for, humans, people who would actually fit in them. Arg, of course, which means Arg, of course, has trouble getting upstairs. And Toby also points out that Arg is probably gonna be fine upstairs because Nancy Domzowski, again, he points out that his Nana isn't great with stairs, and points out that she only ever comes up once a month to clean, which she just did, so it's fine. But also he points out that the upstairs are pretty much theirs. At which point they proceed to climb upstairs. He proceeds to eventually get into Toby's bedroom, and Toby then proceeds to pull out a magic kit and tells him that this is where the magic happens. And he then proceeds to show him several of his magic tricks, including the magic floating ball, which he points out ladies quote unquote love. He's never actually met a woman, but we'll get to that. And of course, he then proceeds to point out, but of course, Arg is visibly surprised at the whole ordeal, to the point where he knocks over Noam Chomsky's dollhouse, and Noam Chomsky is visibly upset over the fact that somebody is messing with his dollhouse, and immediately runs out onto the balcony of the dollhouse to yell at Arg and tell him to put it back. In gnome speak, of course, because Noam Chomsky just kind of screams and chitters like a chipmunk. He doesn't actually speak. But Arg is able to figure out what exactly it is that Noam Chomsky wants, and eventually writes his dollhouse and fixes it. And while Noam Chomsky is visibly annoyed, he goes back to what he was doing. But in case Arg then proceeds to wonder if it is in fact blood magic that's enabling Toby to use the magic floating ball, but he reveals that it's just a magic trick, and it's heavily implied to be just some sort of yo-yo thing. There was this magic floating ball thing, I remember, this was back when I was a kid. You can buy it. It doesn't exist anymore, but there was this magic ball trick where you were able to just make it run over your arms and all of the things, and it looked really cool in the commercials. Turns out that was an advanced level technique for magicians, and that they don't actually do anything. You had to actually train yourself to be able to use it. So it was pretty much worthless unless you're already a pro magician. So, not super great. And Toby's kind of works differently. But he's at this point where they then proceed to settle in, and of course it's at this point where Toby quickly realizes that Arg is having a difficult time settling in, and he quickly realizes that it's cramping his style, as it were, and then apologizes, pointing out that he was just really excited to have a roommate, pointing out that it's just been him and his Nana for the longest time, and he was just excited to have someone else in his life to just hang out with. So for that reason, eventually Arg realizes that decides to reassure Toby and asks to see more magic tricks. So Toby pulls out his magic thing again, and he shows him how to do the floating ball trick. Meanwhile, Jim proceeds to arrive at Claire's house to babysit, and they make and Jim, of course, takes his gaggle tech and stuffs it into his bag so that he knows. It's just to make sure that he knows he has it. And they make a big play of him putting it in, because they visibly show him putting it in the bag before he comes into the house. But he then proceeds to arrive in the house, and Claire is somewhat frantically going around the house, making sure everything is in shape before she leaves, because obviously this is the first time Jim has babysat for Enrique, and she's not entirely sure if he can handle it yet, but or is even nervous about, and is also a little bit nervous about leaving Enrique at home with Jim. But Jim reassures her that it's probably fine. At which point she then proceeds to go through a bunch of different things for babysitters and other things. She tells him that there's food in the fridge if he wants it. That to help himself to some of the snacks. Points out that she left Enrique's nap time schedule and a bunch of other things on the counter. She tells him that when he's supposed to eat and be fed and burped and have his diaper changed. And most importantly, she tells him that she left a series of emergency contacts on the fridge on the off chance something goes horribly wrong, which it does eventually, but we will get to that. But of course, she also expresses that under no circumstances is Jim supposed to call her parents first. With Jim quickly catching on that Claire's parents don't even know that Claire's going to the concert, and he takes the opportunity to tease her about it, realizing that she's keeping a secret from her parents. And I'm sure, of course, she points out that he's not the only one keeping secrets, and does point out that if she can trust him to babysit, and of course, Jim reassures him that that is completely fine, that she has nothing to worry about, and he will take care of everything. At which point, her ride arrives, and she thanks him again for babysitting for her little brother before going up, but also points out that he's locked into his baby swing, and he probably won't be getting out, so Jim doesn't really won't have to worry about him unless something happens. And of course, again, we'll get to that. But it's at this point where she proceeds to run out and once again thanks Jim for babysitting, and Jim then proceeds to see her out, but is then both mortified to both A, discover that Steve Palchuk is in fact her ride, but also B, that Steve is riding the very Vespa that he was browsing in the market in town the other day, earlier that day. And of course, Jim is surprised, is a little upset that Claire is going with Steve. But Claire points out that she kind of had no choice since Steve bought the last tickets and offered to take her. But also before he leaves, Steve then proceeds to brag about his new Vespa and about how it was the last one on the lot, about all the horsepower that it has, and it's just kind of just goes out of his way to make Jim feel like shit. And it works. Jim is visibly annoyed by the time even after Steve leaves, and then slams the door to Claire's house before going back inside. And it's of course at this point where he then proceeds while Jim is distracted, he gets a closer look at Enrique, and then proceeds to ask him if he is in fact a changeling, and asks him and just kind of playfully plays with him, asking him if he at any point had ever been a strange troll creature. But and of course Enrique just seems at first to be just a normal baby. There's nothing wrong with him. He's completely fine and in excellent health. And Jim initially decides to drop it, but then when he goes through his bag to look for some of his stuff, and he quickly realizes that his gaggle tack is missing, and also when he looks back, and also upon closer inspection, discovers that Enrique's baby swing is unclipped. When he notes that Claire had made a very big point of him being clipped into his swing and couldn't get out. And also points out that it's supposed to be childproof, which means he definitely shouldn't be able to get out. And then realizes that Enrique starts to suspect that Enrique might in fact be a changeling, and tries to get a closer look at him. And of course, Enrique, of course, just continues to act like a baby, like a normal baby. So Jim doesn't really, don't look into it all that much, but also realizes that something is clearly going on. So he decides to play a little game with Enrique. Meanwhile, it then proceeds to cut to Arg and Toby playing an actual game at Toby's house. And I forget the name of the video game, but what it's expressly made clear is that it's a violent video game. It is a video game that, of course, Toby is trying to get Arg into, and also points out that Arg isn't really helping all that much because Arg is finding the controls a little bit confusing. And of course, this is this point where Toby then proceeds to start calling Arg Wingman, pointing out that he's got his back, and that Arg is his wingman is supposed to have his back. And of course, Arg, after finding out what the term wingman means, does try to have Toby's back, but it quickly becomes apparent that the violent video game is not sitting well with Arg, and of course, Toby just chanting "kill them all" as they're trying to kill all the enemies in the video game is clearly agitating Arg. It eventually gets to the point where Arg has a very interesting reaction. Arg starts the runes on his body start glowing, his eyes turn bright dark green, and he then proceeds to smash the controller in his fists. Before Toby quickly realizes that something is clearly wrong, and points out that when Arg gets into a video game, he really gets into a video game. And of course, Arg eventually comes back to his senses, realizes what he's done, and then proceeds to chant pacifist to himself to calm himself down. And of course, Toby quickly realizes that maybe the violent video game wasn't such a good idea, and quickly realizes that it's perfectly fine, because he points out that everybody gets angry and it's important not to act on those emotions. And before deciding to switch topics immediately, and proceeds to pull out a completely different video game, Go Go Sushi, which he points out, which he makes a very big point of, points out that it's not violent in the slightest. In fact, it's the main premise is that you're supposed to dodge sushi, and you're not, and there's nothing violent in it whatsoever. And when Ark realizes that they're going to be playing a much more calming video game, he calms down. So and of course he's very happy about the fact that he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. But of course, this is this point where he gets a call from Jim, who then proceeds to tell him that he needs that if they have an extra gaggle tack handy. And of course, this is this point where R, Toby, and Blinky then proceed to go back to Hardstone Troll Market to procure another gaggle tack, with Blinky leading the charge, pointing out that it should take about 5 minutes to get another gaggle tack. And but points out that it's very likely that if they lost the original one, there's very little likelihood that they're going to be able to procure another one. But of course, there's this point where he proceeds to knock on the door to Rot Guts, and of course Rotten Gut proceeds to answer the door. But and of course he then proceeds to implore them to give them another gaggle tack and see if it's possible to get a new one. And of course Rot initially is interested. Rod initially answers the door, but Gut shuts him down, pointing out that they're not allowed to give out free merchandise, and also points out that they're closed. And of course Blinky points out that that's completely preposterous, pointing out obviously that they haven't closed their store, in centuries, essentially, as we find out. But of course, once again, we implores that they get a new gaggle tack. But of course, Gut continues to tell them that they're not allowed to to not stop giving out free merchandise, even though they literally have a bag full of gaggle tacks. And then proceeds to slam the door. And of course, if Blinky is frustrated about the fact that they were unable to find any success, but it's at this point where Toby decides that he's going to try his hand at it, and he's a lot more successful, because as we find out, he has this brilliant idea to grab this bag of and he then kind of motions to Ark, who pulls out a gym bag, and then proceeds to tell them that if Rotten Gut lets them have a new gaggle tack, that he will give them a huge bag of slightly soiled, slightly sweaty Argyle socks, and they relent immediately and give Toby exactly what he wants. So yeah. So yeah, this is where it becomes a recurring bit, by the way, where they keep offering Rotten Gut or Argyle socks in exchange for the various things that they want. So of course, meanwhile, Jim is currently fishing around. Is currently brought Enrique up to his bedroom and proceeds to fish around in the baby pail, the diaper pail, pointing out that it's probably in there, though he's hoping it's not. But also points out that that's probably what little babies do. So and of course, he then proceeds to fish around in it, but can't find it. But then Enrique disappears while he's searching and he quickly and it's at this point where his suspicions start to become a little more concrete as he realizes that Enrique shouldn't be able to get out of his crib, let alone leave, let alone just disappear. So he's quickly realizing that something isn't right with his baby. Something is definitely not right with his baby. So, and at which point he then proceeds to search around the house for Enrique, who is kind of just crawling all over the place. And as we find out, we're heavily implied from a POV shot, crawling on the ceiling, as it turns out, like legitimately. But either crawl, but of course, Jim is looking around, trying to find him when he spies Arg, Blinky, and Toby outside with the new gaggle tack, and he immediately meets them outside, and he pulls and they give them the new gaggle tack. But of course, Blinky wants to know where the baby actually is, and of course, it's at this point where he points out that Jim has kind of misplaced the baby at the current. But at which point it's revealed that Blinky has a completely different idea about what babysitting is, and he took it quite literally. As he points out, as he quickly points out, he doesn't know how Jim could have lost the baby if his job is to literally sit on him. But of course, Jim points out tries to point out that that's not actually what babysitting is, but decides against it and decides to just kind of get back into the house. At which point they quickly realize the door's locked, and they quickly realize that Enrique has locked them out of the house, and of course realizes that he played right into his trap, and realizes that he's not going to be able to just get back into the house, and they're going to have to find a different way in. But of course Toby once again reassures him that it's probably not that simple as that, and pointing out that Enrique's a baby, he can't be that smart, but and of course, it's eventually at this point where Jim realizes that Claire has left her window open, and realizes that that's probably the only way they're going to get back in the house. But also with Jim once again reassuring that he's pretty confident that Enrique is a changeling at this point. So they proceed to sneak back in through Claire's bedroom window. And of course, Jim is very much focused on the task at hand, while Toby is just kind of in awe at Claire's bedroom, because it's the first time he's ever been in a girl's bedroom, as he points out, and he didn't know that that's what it looked like inside. When and of course Jim is just telling Toby to focus, but Toby is just kind of happy about the fact that he's inside a girl's bedroom finally, and does point out that Eli owes him $5 for that, and then he proceeds to actually help himself to some of Claire's lipstick, which he eats like candy, which you're not supposed to do. I should mention that you're not supposed to eat like candy. But Jim then proceeds to focus, and they eventually arrive back in the house, and where they eventually go back into Enrique's bedroom and discover Enrique just sitting in his crib, completely oblivious to what's going on. And of course Toby then proceeds to reassure Enrique, pointing out that the big bad troll hunter man probably just scared him, and proceeds to pull him into a hug and coddle him. And of course Jim points out that it's probably just a normal baby, but then proceeds to pull out his gaggle tack, which and of course immediately as soon as the gaggle tack comes out, Enrique has an interesting reaction to it, and immediately starts crying. With Toby telling Jim to put the thing away because it's freaking Enrique out, but Jim tells him that Enrique is freaking him out, and does point out that it's probably not going to hurt him. So they sort of fight for a little bit with Toby playing a bit of keep away with Enrique, but eventually Jim then proceeds to press the gaggle tack to Enrique's forehead, and of course they quickly find out that it is in fact a changeling, which winds up being called not Enrique for the rest of the series, because that's the thing that Toby exclaims when he first sees that Enrique is a changeling, that it's not Enrique. So that winds up becoming his name, not Enrique. So yeah. But in case not Enrique, upset that he's been uncovered as a changeling, then proceeds to knock several bits of furniture inside the real Enrique's bedroom around, and then proceeds to escape out in the hallway, and also immediately spies the cat, and tries to eat it. And of course, Jim and Toby come after him at the exact point. At which point, they tell Not Enrique to spit the cat out, and Not Enrique eventually relents and then proceeds to give them a bit more trouble before running downstairs. And I should mention, Blinky and Arg don't help at all for most of the sequence because as Blinky points out, he thinks that Jim should be able to handle it on his own, and that this is a perfect opportunity for Jim to do it without the quote-unquote safety line. So he kind of forces Arg to stay in hiding and wait out in the bushes for a little bit longer. And although Arg struggles a little bit to do that, but it's of course it's at this point. But of course, as they're running around the downstairs, it's at this point where not Enrique gets out a magazine and a glass of wine and tells them that they don't know how lucky they have it, and that's a party based on what it's like in the Darklands. But of course, it's at this point where Toby tries to tackle him, and he just makes it, and not Enrique just climbs onto the ceiling and makes his way into the kitchen. At which point, Toby gets a closer look at the magazine that not Enrique had out, and concludes that it's a very bad baby. So yeah, it's heavily implied to be a dirty magazine. They don't say it, but it's heavily implied based on Toby's reaction to it. At which point Jim then proceeds to run into the kitchen, where he then proceeds to summon his armor and daylight sword, and threatens to kill non Enrique if he doesn't tell them where the bridge is. But of course, it's at this point where non Enrique points out that there's not really anything Jim can do to him and kill him or anything else like that. Pointing out that obviously non Enrique is currently a changeling of the Nunez's baby boy. And he points out that if Jim kills not Enrique, and it becomes apparent that something has clearly happened to the sweet darling baby boy, that Jim might very well be in trouble, in a lot more trouble than he would be otherwise. And Jim, of course, realizes that is in fact a real problem, and puts the sword away. At which point they proceed to fight with not Enrique, climbing in and out of cabinets, throwing things at Jim, and a whole bunch of other things. While Jim just kind of fends everything off with pots and pans. Eventually, Arg gets sick of just watching Jim and Toby flounder a bit in the kitchen, and eventually realizes that they need help and that he needs to go in and give them an assist. While Blinky points out that obviously they can't do that. They're pointing out that this is an opportunity for Jim to grow. Arg just kind of points out that that's a moot point and that they clearly need help. So he proceeds to try and go in, but at which point Blinky tries to block the door, but then gets a knife stuck in him. And when one of the knives goes through the door, and he then proceeds to tell Arg to knock the door down, but also tells him to be gentle because human houses aren't built for troll strength. And case in point, Arg accidentally breaks the door down by accident. Not even on purpose. He just knocks on it, and it falls over. And of course, Jim is visibly upset because Arg just knocked their door over. But this is this point where Blinky and Arg proceed to come in and help and offer assistance. But of course, it's this point where non Enrique points out that he didn't remember inviting them to the dinner party, and then proceeds to go back into the fridge, grabs a box of frozen peas and starts spitting, and then pours them all into his mouth and spits them out at them like a machine gun. And which proceeds to blind Blinky, and he goes down for the count for a few minutes. At which point Arg and Toby quickly realizes that it's exactly like their game Go Go Sushi, and they quickly realize that they know exactly what to do in this situation. So they make a plan. Toby goes in, draws non Enrique's fire, as it were, while Arg goes in to capture him. And of course, this winds up working, and they manage to incapacitate non Enrique by just knocking the wind out of him, and he winds up landing harmlessly to the floor. At which point Arg proceeds to scoop him up, and they proceed to quite literally press him for information. Or essentially Blinky forces Arg to kind of not necessarily crush him, but squish him until he gives out the information. And of course initially non Enrique relents, initially non Enrique is reluctant to relent, pointing out that it's just his first day, he shouldn't know anything, but And of course, at this point where they continue to press him for information, quite literally, and eventually, And eventually, Enrique finally gives and points out that they can't blame the guy for protecting him. And he points out that he doesn't really know anything about the bridge since he was literally just brought out to help at this point and create another changeling. But he does point out that if anybody finds out that he told Jim what happened, that the boss man would feed him to Bilar, which of course implies Strickler. And Jim doesn't know that Strickler and Bilar are working together yet. So this causes Jim to be thrown for a loop for a minute because he realizes that Bilar isn't their only adversary and that somebody else is working with him. But Enrique claims up, pointing out that he said too much before they can even say anything. But it's at this point where they find out that Claire is on her way home. Jim actually winds up getting a call as they're trying to figure things out, and they quickly realize that. And sure enough, Claire's parents immediately come home as they're about to do that, and of course they come home early, and Blinky and R quickly decide to make their leave and make themselves scarce, but and they'll try to take Enrique with him, but Jim points out that he needs him because they're supposed to be babysitting him, and of course it's at this point where Claire's parents then proceed to just walk in comically. And then they walk in because they come home early, much to Claire's chagrin. And they don't see any of what happened. They just see a normal Enrique with Jim, a kid they've never met before, just sitting in the middle of their messed up kitchen, and of course Jim just awkwardly introduces himself as the babysitter, while Enrique is just kind of sitting in his Enrique form, of course, but he's just sitting in Jim's arms and just kind of plays it off as everything's normal. Don't look at us. But and of course this is this point where Claire comes home like a few seconds later and realizes Jim messed up her kitchen and quickly realizes that she's in big trouble. And then the final shot of the episode that we see is of the Darkland Nursery, where we see a variant of goblins that we haven't seen before, which we do actually kind of meet them somewhat in a later episode, and they are established to be different species of goblin. But these goblins are white and a different color than the usual goblins we see. But what we quickly find out is that they tend the nursery in the Darklands, and the nursery itself is quite massive. There's quite a few captive babies in there. So yeah, that opens up an interesting can of worms. But yeah, and that does address that it's not just one person, but like a lot of people that they're going to need to rescue from the Darklands, all of whom are still babies. So it's kind of a little interesting, but. In case this episode does open up some interesting things, it explains how changelings are made. It explains where the changeling. It kind of establishes who the new changeling is, because Enrique is very much established to be a changeling now, and the revelation of not Enrique being a changeling, that does wind up having greater ramifications down the road, but also we find out a little bit more about why Ark's a pacifist. He sometimes gets angry, he smashes things, and then he causes problems, which is all of us. But it isn't. But we also find a little bit more about Toby, about how he's just been living alone with his nana for the longest time, and we do find out a little bit later what happens, why he's living alone with his nana. But for the time being, they just kind of imply that there's something deeper going on there with Toby, and they don't explore it yet. They'll explore it eventually, but not right now. Yeah, that's gonna do it for my review. I do like this episode because it's funny. That's mainly the thing. It just devolves into chaos essentially, and I do kind of love that. But yeah, this episode definitely has some interesting story elements to it. It has some interesting revelations to it, but also it's just funny because Jim is asked to babysit a baby that he suspects to be a changeling, and it goes exactly how you would expect. So yeah, this episode's just fun. But in any case, that's gonna do it for my review of Trollhunters. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks down on my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those. The help link is down in the description. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then first and foremost, check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. I'm currently in the process of, well, finishing Miitopia and also streaming Pokemon Violet over there, because I've been playing Pokemon Scarlet over here. I'm streaming Pokemon Violet over there. I hope you guys will come and check both of those playthroughs out. But yeah, we're probably gonna be finishing Miitopia this week, probably. So I hope you guys will come and hang out for that. But also, and also, if you want to just see more content from me in general, if you're already here, be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!